The cold, sterile air of the courtroom felt heavy, almost like it was pressing down on Jasmine Parker. She stood there, her heart racing in her chest. She was used to being strong, used to fighting back when things got tough. But today was different. This wasn't just any fight, this was something far more dangerous. A cop's hand shot out, grabbing her wrist like iron, his grip tight and unyielding. The whole room went silent, every eye on her as she was dragged toward the holding cells. Her mind raced, her thoughts a blur. As she was pulled across the courtroom, her eyes locked with the judge sitting at the bench. Judge Matthews. His expression was cold, unreadable. But something in his eyes caught her attention, a flicker of doubt, maybe even guilt. Jasmine couldn't help but notice it. There was something wrong here. Something was off. The cop's hand was still wrapped around her wrist, pulling her away, but Jasmine's thoughts were moving at a mile a minute. Why was this happening? Had she unknowingly stumbled into something too big, too dangerous for her to even understand? What had she done wrong? Why was she the target? Then, just as she thought things couldn't get any worse, the door to the courtroom creaked open. A man stepped inside, dressed in a sharp suit, his presence powerful and commanding. But it wasn't just his sharp clothes or confident stride that caught Jasmine's attention. It was the way he looked at her. His eyes weren't just glancing in her direction, they were locked on her like he knew her, like he had been watching her for a long time. A chill ran down her spine. Was this someone who could help her, or was he just another part of the trap closing in around her? Jasmine couldn't shake the feeling that things were spiraling out of her control. She had always played by the rules, worked hard, tried to make a difference in her community. But now, this corrupt system had locked its sights on her. Why? What had she done to deserve this? Just when Jasmine thought things couldn't get worse, the door at the back of the courtroom creaked open. A man stepped inside, his sharp suit catching the light as he moved. His confidence filled the room. Jasmine couldn't help but notice how everyone seemed to notice him. But what struck her most wasn't his expensive suit or the way he carried himself, it was the way he was looking at her. It wasn't just a glance. His eyes were locked on hers, like he knew her or had been watching her for a long time. Jasmine felt a shiver crawl up her spine. Was this man here to help her? Or was he part of the reason she was in this mess? Something about his gaze made her feel uneasy, like she was being studied. But at the same time, there was a sense of comfort in his presence, almost as if she wasn't as alone as she had felt just moments before. Still, she couldn't shake the nagging feeling that there was more to him than met the eye. Her heart pounded harder in her chest as the cop kept dragging her toward the holding cells. Jasmine's mind raced, piecing together the situation. Who was this man? And why had he come in now? Was he here to make things worse, or had he come to change everything? The courtroom buzzed with whispers as the man walked toward her lawyer, who was sitting at the defense table. Something was about to happen, but Jasmine couldn't figure out what. Jasmine had always fought hard to make a life for herself. She'd worked 2 jobs to put food on the table and volunteered at community centers. She'd spent her life trying to lift others up while climbing up herself. But today, everything was different. A system she had tried so hard to trust was now turning against her. She had no criminal history, no reason to be targeted, and yet here she was, trapped in a courtroom, about to be thrown into a nightmare. The grip of the cop's hand on her wrist felt tighter with every step she took toward the holding cells. Why was this happening? What had she done wrong? She had always played by the rules, stayed out of trouble, worked to improve herself. So why was she being punished like this? Her mind raced, trying to figure out if she had unknowingly uncovered something. Could it be possible that she had gotten too close to something dangerous, something they didn't want her to see? As the cop's grip dug deeper into her skin, Jasmine's heart dropped. She wasn't just any random person caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. There was something bigger going on, and she didn't know if she was strong enough to fight it. But one thing was certain, she couldn't give up. Not now. As Jasmine was pulled toward the holding area, her mind was spinning. What was happening? Her world seemed to be turning upside down. But then, something unexpected happened. A door creaked open on the far side of the room. The sound sliced through the tension like a knife. A man walked in, dressed in a sharp suit, his steps purposeful and sure. His presence was powerful, and it drew the attention of everyone in the room. Jasmine watched him, her eyes locked on his, but she didn't know who he was. There was something about the way he carried himself, something that made her feel uneasy, but also strangely comforted. He didn't look like someone who had just walked in by accident. He looked like someone who knew exactly what was going on. Her heart was still racing, but now she had questions. Who was this man? Was he here to make everything worse, or was he someone who could help her? As the cop tightened his grip, the man walked over to Jasmine's lawyer, whispering something urgently. Jasmine couldn't hear their words, but she saw the exchange. Her lawyer stood up, pale and nervous. The man had handed him something, documents, maybe? Her lawyer's face told Jasmine everything she needed to know. This wasn't over. Not yet. Jasmine's lawyer rushed over to her, his face pale and filled with disbelief. He held a stack of papers, his hands shaking. Jasmine, he said, his voice urgent, they've been setting you up. It's all here, bribes, tampered evidence. The whole thing. Jasmine's heart skipped a beat. What was he talking about? She felt like the world had tilted off its axis. What do you mean? She whispered, barely able to speak. Her lawyer handed her the papers, his face tense. You're being framed. This arrest, this trial, it was all planned. Judge Donovan and the cops, they've been paid off to make you their scapegoat. Jasmine's breath caught in her throat. She couldn't believe it. She had always tried to do things the right way. Now, her life was falling apart, and everything she believed in seemed to be a lie. But before she could say anything more, her lawyer spoke again, more urgently. There's someone else who's been watching this all along. That man, the one who walked in earlier, he's the one behind the investigation. He's here to help you. He's got the evidence, and he's on your side. Jasmine looked at the man across the room, her confusion deepening. Who was he? How did he know all of this? She couldn't shake the feeling that there was so much more going on than she could understand. Jasmine's mind was racing as she was dragged toward the holding area. She'd always played by the rules, and now it felt like everything she worked for was slipping away. Her lawyer had just told her that she was being framed, but she couldn't understand why. Why her? She had no criminal history, no reason to be targeted, yet here she was, caught in the middle of something much bigger than herself. As the cop's grip tightened, she heard her lawyer's voice again, but it was different this time. Don't worry, he said quickly, rushing back toward her. I've spoken to him. The man in the suit? He's the one behind this investigation. He has everything we need to expose the whole thing. It's not over, Jasmine. We have a plan. Her lawyer's words were a lifeline, but Jasmine couldn't shake the feeling that her life was still on the line. There was so much at stake now. Her heart raced as she tried to process what was happening. This wasn't just a courtroom battle anymore. This was war. The truth was coming out, but it wasn't going to be easy. The next morning, Jasmine found herself back in the courtroom. The tension in the air was almost unbearable. She couldn't stop thinking about everything that had happened, the man in the suit, the papers her lawyer had given her, and the shocking revelation that she was being framed. It felt like the world was closing in on her, but she couldn't give up now. She had to fight. As she walked into the courtroom, her eyes immediately went to the man in the sharp suit. He was standing in the back, his gaze fixed on Judge Donovan and the officers involved in the scheme. Jasmine's heart raced. Was this the moment everything was about to change? The man stepped forward, his voice clear and commanding. Your Honor, he said, turning toward the judge, the charges against Miss Parker are false. I can prove it. Jasmine's breath caught as the man began to present the evidence. Wiretap records, video footage, emails. Everything she needed to clear her name was right there in front of her. For the first time, Jasmine could see the pieces of the puzzle coming together. The corruption wasn't just happening to her, it was happening everywhere. And now, it was time for the truth to come out. Jasmine could hardly believe her ears. The man in the suit had just dropped a bombshell. He didn't just have the evidence, he had testimonies from officers ready to speak out against the corruption. Detective Carla Hughes, one of the officers, stepped forward, her voice shaking but strong. "I overheard Judge Donovan planning to fix cases for criminals in exchange for money," she said. The room went dead silent. Jasmine's heart pounded in her chest. This was it. The moment she had been waiting for. The cops in the room were starting to look nervous, glancing at each other like they knew the game was up. Judge Donovan tried to stay calm, but his hands were shaking. "What do you think you're doing?" he snapped. Jasmine could see through it. He was trying to intimidate everyone, but the truth was out, and he couldn't stop it now. The man in the suit turned to the judge, his voice cold. "You thought you had control, Judge Donovan. Now, you'll pay the price for your betrayal of the very people you swore to protect." Jasmine watched, her heart racing. This was bigger than her now. This was about justice for everyone who had been hurt by this corrupt system. Jasmine stood there, stunned, as the man in the suit made a shocking announcement. "Let me introduce you to the new head of internal affairs," he said, his voice booming across the courtroom. "Jasmine Parker, the woman you've tried to frame, is now the one in charge." Jasmine couldn't believe what she was hearing. She had spent her whole life just trying to survive this system, but now she was in charge. The weight of it all hit her like a ton of bricks. She was no longer a victim. She was the one holding the power. The cops and the judge looked around nervously, realizing that their game was over. They had underestimated her. But now, it was Jasmine's turn to take control. "You've all made a huge mistake," she said, her voice steady. "And now you're going to pay for it." Jasmine felt a fire burn inside her. The system had tried to crush her, but now she was the one calling the shots. She wasn't just fighting for her own freedom anymore. She was fighting for everyone who had ever been let down by the corrupt system. The courtroom erupted in chaos. The cops, caught off guard, tried to fight back, but it was too late. The evidence was undeniable, and their corruption was exposed for everyone to see. Judge Donovan's face turned pale as he was escorted out of the room, his career in ruins. Jasmine couldn't help but feel a rush of satisfaction. For so long, she had been pushed down by the very system that was supposed to protect her. But now, she was the one holding the power. The officers who had once looked down on her were now being taken away, their faces full of fear and regret. The man in the suit gave her a nod of respect. "You've done it, Jasmine," he said. "You're not just a survivor anymore. You're the one in charge." Jasmine's steps felt lighter as she left the courthouse. She had fought for justice, and now she was the one enforcing it. She wasn't just surviving the system anymore. She was making sure no one else had to suffer the way she had. This was her fight, and she wasn't backing down.